Hello, my name is John Solomon, and I'm here with Nick Kelly, fellow secretariat member for the Cyan-driven Good Faith Cybersecurity Researchers Coalition. For those of you not familiar with Cyan, we're the Cybersecurity Advisors Network. We're a nonprofit federation of cybersecurity subject matter experts from around the world, headquartered in France. And the GFCRC is one of our several initiatives, in this case, geared towards recommending policy protections for responsible cybersecurity researchers and vulnerability disclosure and protections from both criminal and civil penalties in this field. So this is the first of a series of videos that we'll be putting up on our YouTube channel, talking a little bit about cybersecurity vulnerability, publication, research, challenges facing researchers, legal issues, comparative regulatory topics, as well as bringing in stakeholders and other interested parties from different organizations, governmental agencies, and industry associations that have an interest in this very broad and current topic. So, Nick, you were one of the two main minds behind the GFCRC initially from the Cyan perspective. Could you give us a little bit of an overview of where this came from, what the challenges were that drove this, and how you decided to structure it the way that we have so far?
Yeah, happily, John. So in 2021, Cyan, as you allude to, is a member organization made up of a blend of technologists, lawyers, policy wonks, all involved in cybersecurity, and we have some very high caliber members all throughout the world, which gives us access to interesting tidbits that are happening in the market, different jobs that are popping up, and most importantly, different issues that are arising within the ecosystem. And this was one that arose within our member ranks initially. Now, for people who are whose role is vulnerability, it vacillates within the realm of vulnerability treatment. This is a well-trodden path of understanding that there are many issues around. But for us, some of our members were certainly au fait with the difficulties that the community faced. We less so. Me and a couple of the other board members, Jean-Christophe Ledoquin and Peter Coroneos, originally, who kickstarted the idea. However, thanks to our very strong member network, we were able to discuss with them some of the issues and then even give them a platform to air some of those issues. And that was back in 2021 at an event called FIC, which is a very, very large, it's the largest French cybersecurity event. And it was a fantastic discussion. It was amidst, in the middle of COVID. So we had a bunch of people on Zoom airing their thoughts, and it turned out, I can't recall how many participants, but there were many. There were dozens and dozens and dozens. And what we realized was this was there's a deterioration of the ecosystem around the research of zero-day vulnerabilities that puts the security of the global digital environment at threat. And we also realized that we had the means to certainly not step on the toes of any initiatives that were already working on this, who were vulnerability treatment experts. But our strength would be, and certainly has proven to be, that we can connect the dots and connect those disparate initiatives, harness the strength of our multidisciplinary audience and multidisciplinary member network, and external network as well, which is vast, and perhaps provide a platform, even a repository for all of those different initiatives to collect and contribute their different research and different works in their own jurisdictions, and then be able to disseminate that amongst those initiatives and also to the broader community, and also to larger vehicles which could affect change on a global scale. And I guess we'll get into that a bit more throughout the conversation, but that was certainly toward the beginning. We saw the ability, well, we had the ability to do this, and then we connected that with a extremely well-established, plenty of gravitas, international governmental organization, which had already been performing research in this field, and had the research chops to do something about it at the national level. And we, in turn, beautiful symbiotic relationship, could support them by building a community and building a global community with initiatives on this topic. So that's where it began. And fast forward to now, and we are in a position where we're registering the association within the next couple of days, which is extremely exciting. And that's been an almost 18-month journey to get to this point. And it has involved numerous Zoom calls, numerous Teams calls, numerous, which are name your virtual platform calls, with high caliber stakeholders involved in this, either directly or peripherally, in numerous jurisdictions. And each of those jurisdictions is, I guess, approaching this matter slightly differently. Some are more maturely in terms of what is considered best practice, and some far less maturely. And yeah, now we're funded by a number of different organizations, vendors and bug bounty platforms and the like. And we also have the support from international governmental organizations as well. So it's fantastic.
Thanks. So it's good to see, because I mean, I think both of us, I think everybody in the Secretariat so far and everybody involved in the board has a huge amount of information security experience over many years. Yeah. We've all seen the I'm going to venture and say somewhat schizophrenic treatment of security vulnerability researchers, where there's this continuum from your malicious cracker all the way to the completely well-intentioned person trying to disclose something for societal benefit. The gentleman who was I believe convicted in Florida in 2016 for exposing vulnerabilities in one of the election websites comes to mind, and many others before him. And you've got this on the one hand, this interest from, let's just say, software vendors, many software vendors who don't necessarily have a forward-looking approach to. They don't take kindly to having vulnerabilities in key products exposed. On the other hand, industry actors who would benefit from the increased stability and increased level of risk management from knowing what vulnerabilities their key systems are exposed to, and somewhere there are governments and bodies politic that are still kind of working out, well, what aspect of this is better for society? Do we strongly restrict the ability of researchers to publish vulnerabilities, or do we want to give them an open platform? What are the ethics of this, and what kind of legal restrictions or protections should we have? I think it's really encouraging to see that, for example, the US announcement in May that they're adapting the Computer Fraud and Computer Fraud and Abuse Act as a good first step in this direction by a major actor. So I guess I'm wondering, we've got all of these stakeholders involved, we've got all these actors involved, we've got governments, we've got on the consumer industry, the consuming, your banks, your insurances, your critical national infrastructure operators, you've got your vendor industry selling software products, you've got customers. How are we, hoping to address these? How are we looking to get these stakeholders involved, informed, and part of that conversation to keep that evolution of the dialogue moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are many, as I mentioned, sort of jurisdictionally confined initiatives that are looking to tackle the issue in their various nations. One off the top of my head is the Cyber Up campaign, and there's that's an interesting one to bring up, but we can that's something for another discussion another day. But
we can link to that in the comments to this video / podcast. So
we can drop that in the comments. Yeah, but their theme is that they are seeking to overhaul the 30-year-old Computer Misuse Act in the UK. Now, that seems like a very valiant effort, which is really, it's necessary. And you do find similar archaic sets of legislation in different jurisdictions, and that's one of the issues that we're facing. It's the fact that, and to make matters even more interesting, and this is something obviously not new to anyone who is involved in anything digital, the fact that you can have one jurisdiction working on a set of working on legislation that defines the actions and the practices that people who are within that jurisdiction, that defines how they must perform their business, whether it's in good faith or, what is good faith. As you can see from the background, that's part of the acronym. But if you then have researchers who are in different jurisdictions, then it muddies the water. And sure, there are international agreements, and there are different to enforce some of the legislation that occurs in one country versus another, and persecute accordingly. But
not to mention a fair amount of jurisdictional, cross-jurisdictional overreach by some actors, and many of your stakeholders, your involved parties, your researchers may not even be aware that there is a country out there that has it in for them, because they're doing something that they may not even realize affects another jurisdiction in some form.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess the reason for laying that as a foundation is that really it's a global issue which requires a global solution and a global vehicle in order to ensure that at least a number of lead nations are on the same page. And so we are entirely independent of, but very much aligned with the policy recommendation of the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, nicknamed the Rich Countries Club, but really they have been around for many years and done exceptional work. They have a lot of resources and put them toward research on difficult policy issues, similar like this, for example, and this sort of fits broadly in their Security in the Digital Economy Working Party. And it so happened that we aligned with the lead author for the policy recommendations, and throughout the 18 months we had numerous calls with that author and the different stakeholders that were presenting this idea of building a community, a global community to connect the initiatives. And that makes sense. From our side, it was about building a community. From their side, it goes back to your question. It's a complex issue. There are numerous jurisdictions. You need a global set of policies to tackle it and ensure that countries are aligned, and countries that are in a position that can adopt codified legislation to this end are doing so. And then by virtue of that, the hope is that momentum will take place, and countries that are non-members of the OECD, which comprises 28 member countries, I believe, will also follow suit, as has been the case in previous examples. And there's an example of the OECD a number of years ago with cryptography, and we can put links to that in the YouTube comment section as well.
It's a good point that you mentioned community, because we're not a lobbying organization. The GFCRC is not designed to go talk to governments and legislatures. Now, if government entity sees our work and takes input from it, takes inspiration, that's one thing. But I think you make a very valid point. Building that momentum, building the community is more one of aligning and informing stakeholders, interested parties,
Yeah.
whether from academia, from industry, industry associations, et cetera, and all these disparate areas that they can in turn then talk more effectively amongst each other, as well as to their own governments to help build that sort of global alignment that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, policy and politics are fickle beasts, both of them. You might have something that's top line agenda today, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's a war, and we see the results. And naturally, things will move up or down the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
This, I guess, is not. I don't know whether it's useful to make a comparison, and I'd be doing myself an injustice if I tried to blurt out some incorrect statistics. But let's just say that ransomware over the last number of years has taken a pole position in terms of, and rightly so, in my opinion at least, just because of the damage wrought, and for the knock-on effects of that. That's not to minimize the importance of this issue, but it is to accept reality and say, as far as a policy ladder is concerned, this may not have been as high, but it still is crucial that we maintain that momentum so that not just the people solely involved in vulnerability treatment, vulnerability research are aware of this as a crucial area that requires adjusting in different legislation, but that it maintains its importance outside of those those circles which solely discuss this, the esoteric circles, and that's part of it.
You could, you'd say basically, since I was in university in the early 90s, when governments were still just experimenting with the idea of computer abuse legislation,
Yeah.
Not to speak of civil lawsuits against people perceived as quote unquote dangerous because they're exposing things they shouldn't be poking their heads in, their noses into. This has been an ongoing concern, and I think it's very legitimate to accept that there are certain topics which are more pressing right now, which are on everybody's minds, while still accepting that there are multiple underlying, constant, long-term structural issues, such as the rights and protections of security researchers and responsible vulnerability disclosures. This is a systemic structural issue that's not going to be fixed anytime soon.
It is.
And as you rightfully say, I think the GFCRC is well placed to kind of not only build that momentum increasingly, but make sure it stays on interested parties' radar, to be able to take it forward in their jurisdictions. So I guess my next question is, who should be joining us? We talk about academia, we talk about vendors, we talk about industry associations, and what is expected of them?
So it's another great question. To ensure the sustainability of any type of coalition such as this, funding is required.
Oh, here he goes asking for money.
Already, we're only 10 minutes in. It's the lifeblood of any successful initiative, and we're no different. We have very proudly done this for the past 18 months. You included, John, pro bono. We see this as an extremely important issue. Initially, it was to support our members, and that is part of what the board is required to do. But quickly, we understood that this was something that we could A, affect positively, and B, we might actually have something there. So the reason I mentioned funding is that it does determine to a point the types of members that we need to join. Are those the ones that do have budget to put toward initiatives for the greater for the betterment of the digital ecosystem?
Well, also I'd say a certain amount of rational self-interest, because especially if you're a large conglomerate that is a significant end user of information technology products of any form, you are going to be interested in the interests of your risk management posture in having access to reliable, timely, and responsibly disclosed vulnerability information. If you look at some of the provisions on under recent EU legislations that say, since the Cybersecurity Act in 2015, there's an increasing onus being put on companies to understand what vulnerabilities their estate is exposed to. And at some point, it's not just common good and the good to society. It's also really being able to ensure that another government somewhere isn't preventing your timely access to the kind of information you need to protect your own ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And by contributing and supporting the community of researchers, some of whom would make up your workforce in these large organizations.
Precisely.
It's a no-brainer.
And that's, one of our main target areas is academia. So answering my own question, being able to help security vulnerability researchers actually do and develop their knowledge safe from prosecution or lawsuits, and thus enter into the industry as part of the workforce. I think that's a really good message to drive home. And regarding funding, I mean, to quote a direct quote from one of my former department accounting guys in a previous life, things cost money. And
eloquent in its brevity, and so true.
we do encourage organizations to be willing to fund the types of events, research, and publications that the GFC has as part of its core activity to help, as you said before, create and drive this momentum forward. So I guess,
and just to finish that off, I guess I went to that first because that's how we ensure a sustainable effort. We've constructed a board, and everything is transparent. You can visit the website gfcrc.org, and then
we're a not-for-profit entity as well.
Not-for-profit entity. Articles of association are all transparent. They've been sent for review to numerous supportive stakeholders, including the vulnerability researcher community, or one of those communities. And we have adopted most all of the comments and integrated them into the articles of association. So they're transparent. The scope of work is transparent, and the funding is one thing that is coming from different avenues. So software makers, software owners, using it. I'll steer away from the specific terminology indicated, although it is extremely well defined and well thought out. The reasons as to why the OECD has adopted particular terminology, but for simplicity's sake, vendors, we have a number of them. Bug bounties, certainly they are key. Then, I mean, to fix this issue, bug bounties do their part, a great part, but they're not a silver bullet. This is a multifaceted issue which requires many different tools in the toolkit, one of which is a community. And for those who are unaware, a bug bounty is effectively the interface between the researcher community and an organization, an entity, opening their environment up for testing, and then giving a remuneration depending on the severity of the bug. Academia, of course, crucial. We have a pilot project. We're confirming a pilot project shortly with a university over in the United States, where they're rolling out, the different types of research questions to their students who are studying fringe cases, and then coming back to us with the results. The idea is to then expand that and roll it out to different universities in different jurisdictions, and then we can compare and contrast, and also feed that information back into the community, and for whoever finds it useful, particularly for international governmental organizations who are then articulating, further iterations of the vulnerability treatment work that they're doing. But most importantly, I saved it for last, are the independent security researchers. It's slightly paradoxical, I guess, in this sense that our target audience are some of the folks who, many of them who would prefer to remain anonymous. That's okay. We do want to offer a vehicle with full transparency in how it's constructed, and also the direction that it's heading. And that direction is born of the decisions of the board, the governance board. And the governance board, sorry, I forgot to mention, the governance board has been constructed in such a manner that you can't it's not a pay for play. We've constructed it so that it is balanced, and we've been very happily surprised and enthused by the level of fairness that even some of the larger funders have come into this discussion and contributed to those articles, and it is very impressive. And the independent security researchers, they're key. And
well, even if not as contributors on an individual level, definitely as beneficiaries of the type of work that the GFCRC does and plans to do.
Yeah,
kind
exactly.
of information. What are the applicable laws in your case? And it's not like our objective is to collect membership dues from individuals necessarily, but rather to publish materials that will benefit everybody, including by benefiting the individual researchers themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And then throughout the year 2023, we will be, I guess, the activities that we'll be doing are many. They still need to be confirmed by the incoming board. However, we've defined a series that are provisionally acceptable. It's just a matter of balancing the resource and understanding what we can focus on. But a number of those activities will be, holding stakeholder sessions with, tech folk and policy folk. These do happen, and they need to happen more, and they need to happen in the jurisdictions that that we have strength in, and they need to happen where we know the right people to put in touch with the other right people. And that's the benefit of being, almost neutral in a sense, because we, when we came into this as walking back to the beginning of the conversation as Cyan, cyber broad, but not vulnerability treatment specialists, we didn't have skin in the game. And this was for the betterment of members in our community. And we've just expanded that. And that has ironically given us access to more of those disparate initiatives working on the same thing that perhaps otherwise.
I think not necessarily commercial skin in the game is the way I would put it, because we definitely do have an interest in this. Well, again, all of us have run into a situation where we would have benefited either individually or collectively from more consistent rules around this.
No commercial interest. That was the exactly.
Which makes sense. I also want to throw in a mention. This is obviously also geared at NGOs, at industry federations, at
society,
any sort of organization, in commercial or non-commercial or individual, that has some kind of a stake in responsible and reliable, dependable, and consistent cybersecurity, vulnerability disclosure, and publication of research, which is probably going to involve a lot more organizations than maybe immediately apparent. Yeah. So thank you very much. I just want to wrap up with a quick mention of our website. We are at gfcrc.org. I'm going to post that link in the comments, both on YouTube and our various podcasting recipient platforms. As mentioned, this is the first in a series of recordings we're going to be holding with members, with stakeholders, with outside experts on topics around regulatory issues, technological issues, psychological, personal, and related topics, all of which are going to be part of our ongoing education campaign to help build awareness. And as you mentioned, the word momentum, I like that, in creating these consistent protections for responsible, good faith cybersecurity vulnerability researchers. Nick, thank you very much, and I will see you on the next one.
As always, a pleasure, John. Cheers.
Bye-bye.